like to think of myself as a questionologist. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term. If you're not familiar with a questionologist, it's probably because I pretty much made up the term, okay? I was a journalist, so I was naturally into questioning for much of my early career, and it was sort of a tool of my trade. But then I started to get deeper and deeper into studying, what makes a good question? How does questioning work? And somewhere along the way I thought, why isn't there an ology, a field of study for questioning? And being a questioner myself, my first question was, why not? And then I kind of moved to the what if stage and said, what if I just declare myself a questionologist? Which I actually did in the pages of the New York Times, and no one questioned it. So I've been a questionologist ever since, and I talk a lot to schools. I do talk a lot to businesses, to companies, and it's a great subject to talk about, questioning. But I have noticed, particularly in the business world, there's a certain attitude toward questioning. So George Carlin said, some people see things that are and ask why. Some people dream of things that never were and ask why not. Some people have to go to work and don't have time for all that shit. And that is kind of, in a nutshell, the attitude you run into in the business world about questioning. There's a lot of interest in it because there's a sense that maybe it's connected to innovation. But there's also this feeling like we don't have time for our leaders, our employees, our people to be sitting around asking a lot of questions. So that's kind of the struggle that you're dealing with when you talk about questioning in the business world. The attitude is sort of, don't bother me with questions, we need answers. And they are under pressure to come up with solutions. So what I'm trying to tell them is, you won't get those solutions unless you ask the right questions. Meanwhile, in the education world, the big issue that teachers are dealing with or grappling with is children enter school as question marks and they leave as periods. I came across some interesting research while I was doing the book that was based on data from the National Center for Education Statistics, and they were tracking the level of question asking that's going on in the classroom as kids go through school, and it basically falls off a cliff. I mean, kids enter elementary school or kindergarten full of questions, and then by the time you get to middle school, high school, it's just going, steadily downhill. So to me, this is a really big issue. I mean, I look at that chart, and that is that's front page news to me. I strongly believe that the value of questions is rising much more rapidly right now than the value of answers. The reason being that when you're in a world of rapid change, the answers don't last. The answers have a shelf life of very, very short time. You look at, say, in a business, they come up with an answer to something. They come up with a product. They come up with a solution that they can offer to customers. Well, in the past, they could have coasted on that for years and years. The business could have made a lot of money off it and just rode on that. In today's world, you come up with an idea, and 2 weeks later, it's outdated, or someone has come up with a better version, someone has figured out version 2.0 of it. So it's a world where the real chief talent now is being able to get to new answers and to do it over and over and over again. And that's where questioning comes into play. Can you teach this? Can you teach this to kids? I thought about, what are the key things that seem to squash questioning? What are the forces working against it? Knowledge, of course, works against questioning. The more we know, the less we tend to ask. When you are starting a job, you're full of questions. You don't know anything. It's a new job. You're wondering about everything. As you get comfortable on the job, you get to know the job, suddenly you're not asking any questions anymore. If you stop looking at your work and questioning it, you basically will fail to innovate, or you'll fail to do anything differently than the way you've learned to do it. But also this idea, especially in school, of coolness. Is it cool to ask questions? I think at a lot of schools, in a lot of classrooms, it's just not. And that is a big, big issue. I think in some schools, it is, and that's terrific. And I think this school is probably a case of a school where kids would not think it was uncool to ask a question. fear is closely related to coolness. If you ask questions, you're revealing that you don't know something, and that's basically something we all fear. And it's a vulnerability. And then time, time is of course a huge factor that works against questioning. In the classroom, teachers have to cover a lot of ground. They have a lot of material they have to get through. And if you are going to have kids asking a lot of questions, the idea is, gee, how are we going to cover that material? So I think these are the big, these are kind of the big issues. And as I've talked to schools about this, everyone's thinking about these questions. How do we make questioning safe? How do we make it fun? How do we make it cool and make it rewarding? And I love to see schools doing what this school is doing, which is some form of project learning with kids, because I think that's one of the ways to address some of these issues. I think what you need to do to make questioning safe in the classroom, you need to make it part of the expectation, part of what everyone expects to happen. So if you are designing projects, if you are designing exercises where the whole goal or the whole objective is to ask questions or explore questions, kids are going to feel more safe then doing that. This is an interesting thing that some schools are doing now, question storming, question formulation exercises. This was developed by the Right Question Institute. A very simple model, but what they do is they go into schools and they teach the teachers how to do this exercise where kids are broken up into groups of 6 or 8. You give them a topic, and the whole point of the exercise is to formulate as many questions as you can within like a 10-minute period on that topic. Very simple, right? Anyone could do that exercise. It's extremely powerful because it's doing something that kids normally never get asked to do, which is to just come up with as many questions as you can. And when you do that, it sort of gets the questioning muscle activated, and kids get really into it. They get really comfortable doing it. It's the whole point of the exercise. I also like that they're in a small group, so they don't have to ask questions in front of 20 people. But this has amazing effects. It's so effective, in fact, I've started taking this model that the RQI, Right Question Institute, does in schools, and I've started doing it with adults in businesses at companies. So I'll go to a big, Fortune 500 company, and we'll have a lot of the people break up into groups and they'll take some big problem that the company is working on, and they'll just formulate questions around it. How many questions can we come up with that address this problem? And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. It really opens up a whole different way of thinking for people. So the point is, I just think schools are going to have to design exercises, projects, and some are already doing it. Anything where the question becomes the whole point. The question is what you're supposed to be doing. It's not a distraction. It's not something that happens after the lesson. It is the lesson. Questioning is a 21st century survival skill. It really is now. It's always been important. We've always known that, you ask questions, it helps you learn. So it's always been important. Now it's moved to another level. Now it's about, if you want to succeed in the world, if you want to do well in the world, especially the world of right now and even more so the world of tomorrow, you're going to have to be a good questioner, because it's going to be all about being able to innovate within your company, within your own career, reinvent constantly. Every time you learn a skill, it's going to become outdated. A couple of years later, you're going to have to learn something new, or you're going to have to update. So you're going to have this comfort level with constantly asking questions. Like, what does this change mean to me? How can I adapt? How can I use my strengths to take advantage of this new situation? I also have come to believe that really our society it may be dependent on questioning, on asking better questions. Certain things that have happened in the last couple of years have led me to believe that, we're not asking very good questions, and we're starting to pay a price for it. And I came across this great quote from 20 years ago by Carl Sagan, which, if we're not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, then we are up for grabs for the next charlatan who comes ambling along. I think we're in a world right now where we need to be able to ask questions about our leaders, the people who would ask us to be our leaders. We need to ask questions about facts as opposed to alternative facts, about news and fake news. What we're seeing now is what happens when critical thinking is in crisis, and what happens is not good. So I think there's a need for us to produce citizens in the future who are able to ask the kinds of questions that will enable them to make better decisions. And thanks for listening. Appreciate it.